My name is Jillian Jones, and I have the extraordinary privilege of serving as the Deputy Director of this wonderful museum. I'm humbled to welcome you tonight to this installation of Voices in Contemporary Art with artist Alex Da Corte, art historian Delia Solomons, in conversation with Cathleen Chaffee, our dear Charles Balbach Chief Curator of the Buffalo AKG. Today, we celebrate the opening of Marisol, a retrospective, a historic moment in the history of this 162-year-old museum. This extraordinary exhibition represents the culmination of the years-long process of processing, researching, cataloging, and just understanding the vast contents of Marisol's estate, which the artist bequeathed to the museum upon her death in 2016. Her act of exceptional generosity was the final gesture in a relationship that had begun more than 60 years ago when this museum acquired Marisol's sculpture, The Generals, a sculpture that many of you probably remember growing up with. In doing so, we became the first museum to acquire Marisol's work. We did so because we believed in her unique way of seeing and understanding the world, and in her unfathomable potential as an artist. And that faith in artists in the early days of their careers is something we hold tightly to as an institution. With Marisol, a retrospective, the world can finally see what it has long overlooked: the limitless creativity of an artist who committed herself to her own artistic truth. We will soon hear from three individuals who are intimately engaged with Marisol's work and legacy. Alex Da Corte is a celebrated artist who works in a variety of mediums, including painting, installation, sculpture, performance, and video. And in addition to writing a beautiful essay for the exhibition catalog, Alex is working on a new artwork based on Marisol's The Party, the group of figurative sculptures that you saw upstairs, which is on loan to us from the Toledo Museum of Art. Alex's new work will debut here at the Buffalo AKG in April of next year. So mark your calendars, mental note. It's okay if you get out your phone for a second. Delia Solomons is Assistant Professor of Modern and Contemporary Art History at Drexel University. Her catalog essay, which is titled, best title ever, Babies, Nuclear Giants, and Other Monsters, is an exploration of, among other things, Marisol's sculptures Baby Girl and Baby Boy, who have been reunited in this exhibition. Cathleen Chaffee, my dear friend, is the Charles Balbach Chief Curator of the Buffalo AKG. The work that Cathleen has done on this bequest, the catalog, and the exhibition is truly beyond words. She is recognized as an expert now in Marisol's life and work. Kathleen, she must be standing over here because I can't see her. It has been awe-inspiring to watch you and your outstanding team do this work. It is not an overstatement to say that together, you and your team have forever changed this museum, and for the better. Before we get underway, I have to thank a few people. First and foremost, I want to thank all of you, our members, and oh my goodness, there is a lot of you here tonight. Yes, round of applause. Our whole team is so humbled by your turnout. Thank you very much for coming, because tonight's members opening has the highest attendance of any members opening in the modern history of the museum. Yeah. The support of your membership is what allows the museum to do its work, to present exhibitions like Marisol, a retrospective, and to welcome hundreds of thousands of people through our doors every year. Note, please, that I said hundreds of thousands. In fact, in our first year, which has just concluded, more than 300,000 people came to the museum. Isn't that amazing? So thank you, and many more thanks ahead. First, this exhibition is supported by a major grant from the Henry Luce Foundation, represented here tonight by Terry Carbone. Are you here, Terry? Can I embarrass you? Hi, Terry. Thank you for being here and for championing this exhibition when it was in a very much a draft form. Thank you. Critical work related to the exhibition and collection was made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. The show was also made possible through support from the Terra Foundation for American Art and the Buffalo AKG National Council, a new group of leadership-level supporters that hail from across the United States. They're represented here tonight by members Matthew Schaub and Layla Jamal, who flew here to be with us. Additional support was provided by the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation, represented by our own Douglas Streichboon. Douglas, somewhere here. Hello. There he is, hiding. Hi. And finally, the exhibition catalog was produced with the support of FRAME, the French-American Museum Exchange. So please join me in one last round of applause for these artists, scholars, and supporters. I have a tiny bit of business because we have a lot going on and I've got to do some plugs. In conjunction with the exhibition, we've organized a program, it's in two parts, called Marisol, Untold Stories. This is a new edition of our popular After Hours series. Part 1 will take place on August 1st and Part 2 will take place on November 21st. Tickets for Part 1 are on sale now and seating is limited. I think you can actually scan that from your phone right now, and it'll work. Please reserve your tickets by either scanning that or going to buffaloakg.org/afterhours, or is that a /? I always mix them up. Or by scanning the QR code. Members receive invitations to all of our After Hours events, as well as free or discounted admission to this and many of our other events and programs. And for those of you who are not yet members, let me tell you, it's worth it. If you don't believe me, just ask any other of the 1,200 people who are here tonight. So thank you so much, and please join me in welcoming Charles Balbach, Chief Curator, Cathleen Chaffee to the podium.
Okay, welcome. Settle in, I have a lot to say. Sorry. And thank you so much, all of you, for being here tonight. Before we begin our panel discussion, I want to tell you a little bit about Marisol. I'm going to get off the QR code. And why we're all here tonight. I will then introduce our special guests and welcome them to the stage. We're then going to have a conversation. I'm excited to hear from them. And we'll have a little, if there's time, we'll have a little Q&A afterwards. Jillian very graciously thanked so many of the people who made tonight possible. I will, after a few remarks, thank a handful more. But of course, first and foremost, we are here because of Marisol. Marisol was born in 1930 to Venezuelan parents in Paris. She moved to New York City in 1950 and began making experimental work. This is her. I like to imagine this is her on the tarmac of Teterboro, but I'm not sure that's true. I think she took the bus to New York, actually. She began making experimental work in New York, as many did in the 1950s. She traveled and hung out with the Circle at the Cedar Tavern of abstract expressionists. She took classes in art and studied aesthetics and art history in the library. She made clever and experimental work during this period, but it was really in the 1960s where she began to in the 1950s, began to think about the family, about the immigrant experience, about displacement, about the feeling of being alone in a crowd, and about the nature of the self. These are themes that stuck with her for the duration of her career. This is her with some of those early works. In 1962, she had a breakout solo exhibition at the Stable Gallery, and at that show, the AKG, then of course the Albright Art Gallery, and then soon to become the Albright Knox, became the first museum to acquire a work of hers, and this is the Generals, which of course many of you know and hope just saw upstairs. We also put it on view right away in the exhibition Mixed Media and Pop Art, one of the first exhibitions anywhere in the world dedicated to pop art as a movement. And this is her at the museum on the left. You will recognize the old floors of the Wilmers building. She also touched up the work. We don't allow artists to touch up their work on site very often anymore. As time went on in the 1970s, she began to make works about ecology, about the life of the oceans, about the interdependence of animal and human intelligence and species, our dependence on the natural world. As she made these works, she experienced a lessening of critical attention, but she never let it dissuade her from working. I mentioned that she took classes in art, but she never went to formal art school, and she learned from libraries. She said that her real school, in the end, was museums, and she really concretized this indebtedness to the education she received in museums and the inspiration she took from museums and libraries, these cornerstones of civic life, when she made the remarkable bequest of the entirety of her estate to our museum on her passing in 2016. This is what her studio looked like. This is her studio and home in 2016. She's someone who lived entirely for and with her art. She is far from a household name today, but this exhibition and the work that this museum is doing aim very determinedly to change that. The small print up there reads, "In honor of Marisol." This is the gallery now hosting her exhibition and named in her honor. I want to talk a little bit for a moment before I thank a few more people about what this exhibition means. This is an exhibition that is, at the end of the day, about the power of museums, and power really of this museum in particular, which I'm going to hit on a little more as I thank some of my colleagues in a moment. But this is a celebration also of the kind of artistic genius that I believe Buffalo has so long been known for embracing. We've been known for embracing those who are sometimes considered outliers or oddballs because they don't fit the boxes that they're put into. Indeed, we have been known for embracing those artists whose tenacity and resistance to categorization is actually what proved to be their superpower. This is an exhibition about bringing people together, about building community, not necessarily around the consensus that Marisol was a great artist, although of course she was, but also around the understanding that works of art with multiple meanings, works that are puzzles, works that obstinately and deliberately fail to resolve into a simple or a singular narrative, works that are, in a word, ambiguous, that these are the works that can change us. They can help us see the wider world with its predisposition to reductionism with greater clarity. They can teach us to look closely and to look critically. They can help us to become more comfortable, even to delight, as I think this image implies, in the company of experiences, objects, people, conversations that do not fit binary categories, that do not resolve lightly or clearly. These are works that bring us the true pleasure of engagement. And this is what I believe you find in this exhibition and at great museums like the Buffalo AKG. But of course, I'm going to scroll through some examples of the work it took to bring this exhibition to fruition. Jillian thanked those who helped fund the exhibition, helped support it. I want to recognize and thank also our lenders who shared the loans that makes this exhibition really shine from across the country. Thank you so much. I have to recognize Julia Vasquez, our former curatorial fellow who's here with us tonight. Her exceptionally hard work over 2 years is felt in every aspect of this exhibition. In addition to our speakers tonight, we are honored to be joined by several catalog authors. I meant to bring the book on stage and do a promo, but I forgot. Their brilliance and new research in the book really brings this exhibition to life. But of course, I also have to talk about our staff. So with our staff, don't even get me started, because I have to say, this bequest so far entailed 600 works on paper, more than 100 sculptures, the artist's library, archives, photographs, her underwater films that she made on 8mm that have been digitized. Our staff oversaw the packing and transportation of Marisol's entire studio. They installed nearly every work in the catalog for new photography. They helped me research and title and date countless works with no known information. They helped with cataloging, identifying rare wood species. Oh, this is a video. Brian, do you know how to play this? No. All right, well, it would have been a video. That's okay. Oh, look, there it plays. This is a time-lapse video, thank you. Rolf is here in the audience, identifying rare wood species, conserving, often in collaboration with our brilliant colleagues at Buffalo State, and all of this often masked in small teams in the midst of a global pandemic, a $230 million building campaign and collection reinstallation. And nonetheless, they completed this project. This exhibition alone comprises 5 tractor trailers worth of crated sculptures and works on paper. It is by far one of the most ambitious exhibition projects this museum has ever completed, and Marisol and her brilliance deserve nothing less. I want to thank a few people by name, and this is only a few. Our former registrars, Laura Fleischman, Carolyn Padua, Catherine Scrivo-Baker. Our current registrars, Denise Mahoney, Rebecca Endres, Laura Brill, and especially Melissa Ellis, who has spent years overseeing this project in close coordination with our contract registrar, Andrea Wood. I hear applause coming. We'll save it. Let's say, okay. Our imaging and digital assets colleagues, Kelly Carpenter, Amanda Smith, and Brenda Beeger. Our colleagues in learning and creativity, especially Brittany Strupp. Oh, the video's over. Here's more. Who led the interpretation and audio journey for the exhibition. Our brilliant archivist, Gabrielle Carlo. Our publications department, especially Pam Hatley and Matt Connolly. And our facilities department led by Jamie Robideau. Finally, I have to, of course, and you've seen this in the slides, emphasize this. Our head of art preparation, Ryan McDaniel, and preparator, Mary Quandras, who has taken a lead role on this exhibition, along with the entire art preparation team. I thank them so sincerely. I will take a pause for applause for the team, please. It is because of the people I have just named and those who I have failed to mention and apologize for, and because of Marisol's genius, that this exhibition is also really about Buffalo. It is a homecoming. Many of you grew up seeing the 2 works that Jillian has mentioned that are so much a part of our history, 2 beloved works from the early 1960s. After this exhibition draws to a close, we plan to always have a gallery dedicated to Marisol's work on view in the museum. Because Marisol trusted us, this brilliant artist is now also a part of our legacy and our heritage here in Western New York. Our talk tonight is less an overview of Marisol's life and career. I think you can see a lot of that upstairs and in some of our talks to come, as well as in the book. It's more a look into this brilliant artist through the eyes of 2 very special individuals who Jillian has already mentioned. It is also an evening dedicated to the passion her work can spark in audiences, and in this case, in the work of 2 particular audience members. I'd like to thank Alex Da Corte and Delia Solomons so much for joining us and trying to share some of that spark with you in the audience tonight. So please join me in welcoming Alex and Delia to stage.
Wait,
All right, how does that sound?
are we good?
Okay?
Okay.
You guys just tell us if it doesn't. Okay. Thank you. Wait, no, too quiet? It's okay? All right. Thank you all so much, and thank you again to our audience. Okay, we have a lot to talk about. What time is it?
7:25.
7:25, we have a clock up there. Oh, we're great, okay. All right, so to start, I'm gonna just scroll through a few early works, and you can see on the screen. It's a reflex. Visitors can hear both of you and me and Mimi Trujillo, Marisol's best friend who's in the audience, on the audio journey for this exhibition. And I wanted to ask, let's see, who should I ask first? Alex. What was it like for you being asked to be in the ear of visitors to this show?
I mean, the last...
Oh wait, can we hear Alex?
Can we hear him? No? Yeah?
Yes, okay, good.
I mumble. Is this better? Okay. The last 5 years...
Maybe hold it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
No, I hear myself.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, go on. Sorry.
The last 5 years, thinking about Marisol has been so special, and we started these conversations and thinking how to understand her work now in a kind of new way, in ways that it hadn't been, and I think it's a total honor to be thinking about the past and paying respects in ways that hadn't been paid to Marisol and to her life's work.
Yeah, I mean, getting to contribute to the audio guide, I love that you described her works as puzzles, because I do think they have this density of references and tones, and so being able to just start to introduce audiences to those layers and those tones. The works are so conversational, and so the hope is certainly that the audio guide prompts even more conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to
It's also
answer
my
the question.
plug for the audio journey. This is T for 3. This is one of the earliest 60s work as part of the bequest. And these include sort of hat forms that Marisol, that kind of jump-started the work that you see in the 1960s gallery of the exhibition. She was given a bag of old hat forms by the wife of an artist friend. And these found objects became kind of a core of found objects that appear throughout all of her work. And I'm trying to get to, this is, anything you want to say about self-portrait, Alex, since we're here?
I mean, we all contain multitudes, and I wrote about this work for the catalog and was thinking about, this portrait of Marisol that she had made where she is these 7 versions of herself, one for each day of the week. And I love thinking about that, and it's like you get to choose which day is Saturday, really, for you, or Friday, or Wednesday, or whatever, it's, what can I say? It's just great.
I think for me, one of my core kind of takeaways of working on the exhibition and thinking exactly about kind of, Alex, your essay about the self and how it relates to how duplication relates to the self is, one of the great lies we tell ourselves is that every day we wake up in the morning and we're the same person as we were on Thursday or Friday, or we're the same person. I said this to a colleague today, that we're the same person we see in those photos of ourselves at 4 that our parents show us. This is a fiction that we create in order to be able perhaps to function in society or get through the day. But the truth is it's a fiction. We are completely different people at different points in our lives. And it's through the power of narrative that we can tell ourselves anything different. I think this displaced portraiture that she affects, and it's so concrete in this sculpture that she is 1 and she is 7.
Yeah. I think that there's this thing, like the kind of diasporic condition is that, like there's this kind of phrase to say that you're an immigrant of time, and that the kind of space that you were promised to arrive at never comes. And so you're always adrift. And so much of Marisol's work is sort of, like I said before in conversation, is sort of like leaving stones or like leaving blocks of wood or pieces of herself through her life, not in a kind of egoistic way, but in a way to say, I was here and a part of me is left there. And maybe if I have to come back, I can find my way, through that space. And I think that that's a kind of that's what, for me, continues to bring me back to her.
Really beautiful. Also.
And the backs, come on.
And the sense of humor. You can't underscore the sense of humor enough.
7 heads, 5 buttocks, and then 1 pair of breasts, I think. Yes, I didn't mean to have a punchline to that beautiful observation, Alex.
Okay, again, multitude.
We contain multitudes. And on that note, this is her portrait of Ruth Kligman, as if she's, in a way, trying to attend to everyone in the crowd at the same time. Was a good friend of Marisol's and an artist in New York at the time. And so, Delia, you've written a beautiful essay about the generals, not in our catalog, but published separately. Could you describe, you've studied the kind of reception and presentation of Latin American art in North America, and that's been one of your great subjects. You have a beautiful book about it. What drew you to this work in particular and led you to study it in depth?
Yeah, so many things. So for an artist who, in all of her bylines, she's labeled as born in Paris, a Venezuelan American, those 2 nationalities, Venezuela Venezuelan American. Those two nationalities, Venezuela and the US, are constantly mentioned in her bio, and it's something she's often navigating. But this is the only work to iconographically grapple with those two identifiers. You have George Washington, kind of iconic emblem of the United States, in the back, and you have Simón Bolívar in the front, who, for those who don't know, just as George Washington was a first leader, a general who helped oust European imperialists from a great swath of American land, so was Simón Bolívar for South America, liberating Gran Colombia from Spain. And so she's saddling up these two geographic representatives next to one another, and it's thinking about hemispheric relations. It's thinking about this fraught relationship between the United States and Latin America. And Bolívar was a kind of a homegrown Venezuelan hero as well, so she's partly thinking about nationality, partly thinking about this larger Latin American scope, but it's an awkward, stilted relationship. It's making fun of great heroic monuments. I mean, it's clearly citing the equestrian monument, right? We're used to all of those in our parks and our squares. And it's such a funny response to that heroic language. She's partly poking fun at the fact that this was made in, it was, 61 to 62, so at this point, Cold War relationships between the US and Latin America were really fraught. This was after the Cuban Revolution, so there was a lot of rhetoric about how, for the US to guard its hemispheric power, it needed to keep Latin America aligned. So there was a lot of rhetoric about hemispheric togetherness, and she's clearly making fun of that. They're forced geographically and spatially together, but it's a psychologically stilted, fraught relationship that she's engaging.
You've described this as an awkward inter-American horseback ride.
Yes.
Yes. And that's the work in its debut exhibition. Okay, so I think it's such a gloss. Like read the essay if you'd like. But
sorry if I went long.
No, it's all fantastic. I think it's great also because this is a work people know here so well. But it is emblematic of the fact that the politics of Marisol's work and the deeper context, the sort of satire and the humor is a first level, but getting beneath it is work that still very much remains needing to be done. Okay, so I'm going to keep going with you, Delia, because so your essay in the catalog, Jillian shared the title of it. It's looking at kind of Marisol, babies as monsters and science fiction. I wonder if you could speak just briefly about like these two works and really seeing them together in the exhibition, perhaps what that kind of brings up.
I love these works. They're so funny. I mean, this was also a deeply personal essay for me because when I wrote this essay, I was pregnant with my second kid and I had my toddler running around me. So, I mean, they're giant, oversized, monstrous babies. It's reflecting the fact that babies and toddlers might be physically tiny, but they take up a lot of space in the room in a really joyful, but sometimes also fraught or overwhelming way. Mm-hmm. And it's also about some of it's the overwhelming pressure to have children, to force oneself into a traditional family dynamic, something she rejected and did not pursue in her life. And it's not just about the babies, but it's about this mother-child artist-artwork relationship because both of them hold, the dolls in these works are smaller Marisols. So any of us who are parents know that sometimes we feel held or controlled or puppeteered by our kids. I mean, there's a lot regarding gender dynamics within these works. There's links to science fiction and ideas of the monstrous.
Could you talk a little bit about like what sort of movies you're thinking of in relationship to these works?
So these great science fiction movies of like the amazing Colossal Man and Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, there were all of these ideas regarding contact with nuclear radiation might have the potential to render humans giant, and it's partly about the fear of growing nuclear armament. So she produces these giant babies almost as if they're like the offspring of these huge nuclear-wrought so-called monsters. I mean, the movies themselves are interesting because oftentimes actually the institutions like the government, the military, the media are the actual monsters, and the oversized figures are the protagonists. So they're just, I love these works.
This is a great image where she seems sort of menaced by the terrifying babies. I like to remind people that if baby girl stood up, she would tower over baby boy. So Alex, shouldn't surprise you. This is one work. People ask me, what do you wish was in the exhibition that wasn't? This is one work that's in the Museum of Modern Art's collection that's too fragile to travel. This is called Love, and I'm going to leave it up for a moment and ask you, Alex, what first drew you to Marisol's work?
Well, this is the first work that I recall seeing of Marisol, and it was shown to me in 2001 by my art historian teacher, Sid Sachs, who has given me so much information over the years, and you know, he worked at University of the Arts for 35 years, and he said, you know, he knew I was making a lot of work about my love of ketchup at the time.
Oh.
I would love ketchup a lot.
Wait, hold on. I think I have an image.
Yes.
Okay.
That's me with filleting a ketchup bottle. But he was like, you love ketchup so much, you're Venezuelan, like you should know this work. And he showed it to me, and it was of course erotic and cool. But what was so appealing about Marisol at the time was that I didn't know anything about sculpture, and I was going to school to be an animator. But the reason I didn't pursue sculpture was because the only sculptures I knew looked like Tony Smith's or Richard Serra's, and they didn't let me in. I wanted to be this sort of soft person that I was, and make things and share things and use my hands and tell stories, and I was told that I couldn't do that. And it seemed, as I sort of researched Marisol's work over time, that part of what drew her to her subjects was just a pure desire to want to know them or to unpack them or to poke fun at them, but that was quite human and also quite poetic and just honest. And I think that's what brings me back to her work over and over again, is the puzzles, but also just the kind of raw humanity that I see in it. The love, you know, or the pain in it. I think it's, I can't stop looking at it. I think it's just so, it's so made, it's so felt, and it's also made by her with her hands. Like the kind of temperature, the warmth of the wood, the temperature of the materials still radiates. You still feel it, and you're like, wow, a person was here doing that. For me, like steel doesn't do that. I just can't with steel.
They're living. They're all organic.
Yeah, you can feel it. It's held. I'm so obsessed with that jacket that's in the Met's collection.
Yes,
it's so fucking beyond.
You remade this jacket, so the Met also wouldn't loan this jacket. No criticism of our colleagues in New York. These works are very vulnerable.
They're just mean.
They're not. This coat is very vulnerable. But Alex, you've made a copy of this work.
Yes, I made a copy of this work for a film that I showed at the Whitney Biennial, in which I was playing Duchamp and his alter ego Eros Selavi. And there was something, I mean, of course, about this work and the way that I'm thinking through gender and embodiment. Always, it felt really urgent to have this work. And of course, it relates to the body print, which is in the show, which is also so fantastic. And it's just quite funny, you know. It's Marisol playing a joke on a request to, you know, take a jacket by Jacques Kaplan and respond to it.
Right, and she gives you the nude body behind it, or what you might eroticize the female body behind the clothes to look like.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to stick with Alex for a moment. Alex, so Jillian alluded or sort of mentioned the fact that Alex is working on a major video installation that we will debut at the museum, and I'm hoping you all will be able to hear from him more later, but in the context of Marisol's work, I'd love it if you could talk just a little bit about either the party or the work you're making in relationship to the party. I leave it to you.
Well, so the party, it's like, it needs no words from me to sort of speak to why it's so brilliant. But it was made for her first show at Sydney Janis in '65. or 65, 66, and these 15 characters that sort of speak to a kind of class systems and what seems to be wealthy people gathered to drink and have fun. It always sort of spoke to me because it is this tableau vivant in a way. Marisol has placed her face onto each of these sculptures as she did, but I guess it's the most ambitious work that she had made to date, and so when I saw it, I had it on my wall for years and years and years, just a picture of it, and I always knew I was going to make an opera about that work. I was raised listening to opera. My parents, that was their love language. They kind of taught each other different languages and just ways of being in the world and kind of romance. They were very fiery people. My father's very fiery, so was my mother. And they fell in love sort of through opera. And so when I was looking at this work and thinking about it, I thought, they're just ready to move, they're ready to be. And so I started writing this opera 4 years ago, where I don't even see these characters anymore as, I only know them by name. I mean, like the woman with the pink dress is my Aunt Magda. I wrote this opera where each of the characters would be played by one of my aunts or my mother or my father. So in brief, I can say that the opera it takes place in this sort of future society where there's only one day of sun a year in relationship to this event called the Miracle of the Sun. And I've replicated every one of these figures in 1/3 scale, where I've then adorned a prosthetic mask of Marisol on my face and then cast my face and shrunk it down to be on all of these figures. And it will be a stop-motion animation opera, a 3-act opera, about these people and what kind of naughty things they're getting up to. And I'm very excited to bring it here to the museum.
Thank you. Yeah. They're excited too. This is good. Thank you. This is just here because I really like it. Delia, and this is a broad question. We'll talk for maybe 10 more minutes and then we'll pause for questions, so maybe a little less. How does a study of Marisol expand what pop art means? And we may take this for granted, but I think it's important to say, and I think you're the best person here to talk about it. Why does expanding the canon of something like pop matter now? Why is it important?
Yeah, there were rigid definitions of pop art that were very much driven by just a few US white male artists, really built around like Warhol and Lichtenstein and and Wesselman and a few artists. With Marisol often included kind of off to the side. They would say, yes, she's somewhat pop, but not quite. So by integrating her, you do a few things. You let go of this insistence upon, you mentioned steel and the machinery and this kind of mass-produced aesthetic that we associate with pop. And she has such a handmade, rough-hewn aesthetic to her work. But at the same time, she's engaging so much of what the pop artist did. She's looking at the mass media. She's looking at constructions of selfhood in relationship to pop culture. She's looking at Life magazine. She's clearly engaging pop art, but by integrating her, you shift the canon, you open up the definitions, and there have been some great exhibitions over the last 15 years, mentioning Sid Sachs and his great exhibition about 15 years ago, Seductive Subversion, which chronicled women pop artists. There's been great work expanding definitions of pop art to make it more global, more inclusive regarding gender and sexuality, and Marisol contributes in such an epic, interesting way to that expansion in terms of demographic but also aesthetic potentials in pop.
Thank you. That was really cohesive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have to, get me started on inter-American relations, and it's not going to be as brief.
I think, Alex, you could read the catalog and hear some of my arguments on this. I know you probably have. But personally, why do you think it's taken until now, perhaps, for her career to be looked at in something that approaches its entirety?
That's a great question. I do think that, she herself did not ever want to be pinned down, which you can read in the catalog, but anytime there was a moment of success, she was willing to just go away and say,
Yeah, that's a
no.
perfect slide
I mean,
for
she,
this.
you know, there's no greater word to teach yourself or teach your kids. It's just no. It's great. And she did it all the time to the art world and was like not willing to play those games. Like she wasn't interested in being courted by Warhol to be like his girl. She was just her own person. And so I think that resistance, I think the kind of breadth of the way she was thinking through things and what is an artwork and that it cannot and should not ever be defined by beauty are like things that also make the work take time. You know, none of these works are made quickly. So also she was respectful of her own time and slow time, and I think now is her time, and that's okay and also just totally righteous and great.
I love that, Alex. Thank you. All right, here's a question for both of you, and we'll perhaps close with it, and then I think there'll probably be a lot of questions from the audience. Delia, for you first. What do you see as the importance of sharing this broad view of this brilliant artist's work with audiences now?
I mean, Alex touched on some of it. I think her work is it taps into such deeply human things. I mean, when I think of the party, I think of that experience of isolation, even when surrounded by a sea of people, that like psychological feeling of loneliness, because they're not communicating with one another. And that's just one theme. She's talking about themes of, you know, pressures into gender roles, limited ideas regarding sexuality. I love that the 3 kiss part too, that's, you know, this kind of multiplied eroticism that could almost go infinitely and welcome another person into that kiss. So it's partly the themes she grapples with, and I don't know of other artists who grapple with it in the same way. For me, especially the boxed-in figures they so clearly epitomize this feeling of being contained, of fearing, you know, showing your full authentic self to others, or almost our inability to fully connect because we're all kind of boxed away from one another. I just think they're so human, but I also, as you all saw from my obsession with this moment in history, they're also so rooted in their own time. So they speak to, there's an evergreen part to her work, but there's also such rootedness, which then also shows the after effects of Cold War culture and how we're still living with them.
I have the same question for you, Alex. What do you think is important about people seeing not perhaps the best known Marisol 1962 to 1967, but seeing the broader breadth of her work in the retrospective today? What can it do?
I think it can kind of cut away a certain kind of binary or bracketing that is sort of the aim of 21st century thinking, which is to say, like, let's not talk about Marisol the pop artist because, like, that's just too limiting. You know, that was only a couple years, and like, you know, we contain multitudes. She had a very long life. Like, let's think about her as a fluxus. Let's think about her as a performance artist. Let's think about her as, you know, in the same regard that other people have been considered or thought of. I think this kind of chameleonic way that she was, I think the kind of doubling and all of the ways that we sort of understand ourselves now with the phone in our hand, this mirror, you know, and these screens and these avatars, it's like she was onto those things in really like simplistic or not simplistic, but rudimentary ways that I think it's just totally righteous now. It just feels so like, I think people are like starved to use their hands. They're like forgetting to use their hands. I mean, I can't even write my own name. And it's like I'm so good at texting, but I can't like write my own name. It's like, this is a reminder that you should just like be making things. You should be like feeling things, and that we're still bodies in the world, and that is like cool.
Bodies and vulnerable bodies.
Vulnerable bodies, absolutely. I mean, things fall apart, we know this, but I think to run from it or to propose that all these things are like, you know, in some digital space would be like a loss to being present and to being here, you know. And if you are an immigrant of time where you're looking for that next spot, that's all well and good to find your home, but it's also okay to then like, you know, it's okay to do both, I think. And I think she was sort of caught in between those ways of being here and wanting something else, you know, and so, yeah, I think it's, like I said, this is her time now, and it's great.
Thank you.
Wait, can we ask you that question? Since you've been spending this time, I mean, this is such an epic project. I'm curious what you think. And I know you've written about this, but...
No, that's okay. I mean, the great joy for me of making this exhibition is, of course, in getting to spend time with these works that we know best. And there are only about a dozen people, and some of them are in the room, who have had the pleasure of actually watching these works get assembled. You know, you saw a little bit of that on the time lapse. But and she talked about this, although like I've spoken with some people who knew her or who heard her talk about her works almost as if they were alive. And there is something that happens, you know, you put the 8 body parts together, but then you put on the head, or then you put on the hands, and all of a sudden it is this double of you that is absolutely not you. It's her, but it's not her. And it is this I spoke about sort of the fragmentation of self across history, and the way that she used these casts of herself and duplications of herself, I think, to emphasize, among many other things, the sort of illusion of the unified self. I think this right now is a time when it is so unbelievably important to be finding ways out of binary thought. And I really believe that that's something incredibly powerful that spending time with these ambiguous objects can really bring us and can teach us. But the great joy of that lies not just in the works of the 60s, it lies in the things that she was doing that were so unwilling to fit. Speaking of boxes, the boxes of movements, the boxes of critics, or expectations of women in society, that she resisted so profoundly and so strongly. I think this might be one of the last images I brought.
It's a good idea.
That's so good. I love the hand pointing.
Yeah. I also, you know, I mentioned it in my introduction. It is the personal experience, the livingness of these objects and getting to spend time with them in person is something that museums deliver, and that now this museum will deliver. I cannot think of a better artist to sort of emphasize the need to see things in person and the need to be with people in space, thinking about them together, even if you're thinking completely different things.
That's what sculpture is. You can't see all sides of it on one screen. It's
Yeah.
Leave your house.
Leave the house.
Yeah.
So I'll leave this image up, and perhaps before we take questions, I'm going to ask everyone to join me in thanking Alex and Delia. The other really great joy of this exhibition has been community, and getting to know these two great minds and so many of my colleagues better is something I don't know if Marisol ever could have predicted, but these works have brought all of us together and challenged us and made us work and think hard and develop new ideas and move in new directions as an institution, and we are so deeply indebted to her and to her brilliance and her trust in us. We have time for a few questions. We're not going to pass the microphone because it always takes too long. So I will repeat the question in a simpler, shorter version. Apologies in advance. Roscoe.
You can really engage with the subject matter of Marisol's work, but I heard you mention rare wood. And is there a backstory to Marisol's preference, the types of wood materials she would select for her work, and some of the larger pieces how?
Roscoe, my friend asked, in brief, I mentioned rare wood. Is there a story behind that? And how did she choose the woods that she used? In the 60s, she was often choosing things she could find on the street or find from friends. She reused wood materials her whole career. In the last gallery of the show, you'll see works from the 1990s that say police line, do not cross. These are stolen, found police barricades that she repurposed, and then that message becomes something fundamental in the work. In this case, it's a depiction of a young Native American boy photographed by a famous Native American photographer, Horace Pulau, and that line, police line, do not cross, becomes a message really perhaps about the imposition of control in that historical moment, and then also the moment in which she puts the sculpture into the world. As her work went later, she was able to get more exotic, more beautiful, more rare woods, When the exhibition traveled to Montreal, there's a law, is it a law? There's CITES, there's legislation. You have to declare all kinds of materials, and there are woods that you're not allowed to buy and sell anymore because the trees are endangered. It would encourage a market for taking them down. So we had to declare all of the mahogany and rosewood, and Rolf can tell me other ones I've forgotten, or Andrea, other rare woods. So we had to research and determine what everything was made of. There's a scholar here in Buffalo who I mentioned, Rolf Hogg, who was able to tell me the age of almost every tree before it had been cut down, looking at the lines of wood in the show. In other materials, we had to fabricate a replacement stuffed bird for one of the works in the exhibition. The lender had lost the bird, and years ago, it was a family sculpture, and you can't own a part or a whole blue jay, or you can't own a migratory bird. You can't even own a migratory bird feather. So we ended up hiring someone to make a fabrication using chicken feathers, so as not to get seized at the border. Yeah. Yes.
It was amazing how prolific Marisol was, and wondered, did she have assistance?
The question was, did Marisol have assistants making her work? There are aspects of her work that were very collaborative. So the works that she made that were public monuments, those required foundries and collaboration. Her work with print studios is a very collaborative work in some ways. And her work with choreographers and the staging and sets, those are all very collaborative. But it's my understanding that she mostly always worked alone, except for those cases. And she talked about spending most of her life alone. She was known for these photographs of her looking extremely beautiful, which of course she was, at parties in the 60s, but it's just such a small part of her life. I think most of the time she was working in the studio using large tools. Yeah. Yes? The General still has a march. There were too many people tonight to hear it. Yes, so the General's out of his butt, I would say, the rear of the horse plays. Well, Delia, you should talk about it.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
Yes.
I love the march. Yeah, so, I mean, she was, at the same time as she was one of the first people, there's an early contingent of avant-garde artists who were starting to use pre-recorded sound. So her friend David Amram had created this, overly bombastic military march, which if you listen closely, you could hear coming out of this mock equestrian monument. But it's also thinking about, this was the same moment where toys began to be battery operated and make noise. So that's part of what I love about her. She's pulling from kids' popular toy culture, but also, working alongside Robert Morris and Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg, who are starting to use pre-recorded sound in their sculptures.
I mean, for me, this is also a way to think about pop art a little bit more expansively. So it's not always just artists borrowing imagery, as you might imagine in the work of Lichtenstein. Alex knows a little bit about Roy Lichtenstein. He's working on a retrospective of Lichtenstein's work that he's co-curating right now with Scott Rothkopf and Meg Onley from the Whitney Museum, and it'll be at the Whitney coming up. But not just Lichtenstein or Warhol, but also the way that popular culture was being digested. So I think that some of those sources, like you mentioned toys, she shared a studio in the 60s with a photographer whose line of work was reprinting family photographs. So you imagine you have a portrait of your family from the teens or the sort of 1890s or teens and 20s. You don't have the negative, right? It's some studio photograph of your great-grandparents. You could send it to this guy and he would, for I think it was $5, make you a copy. But she shared a studio with him and she would go through his trash at night. And through that, she created the babies, Baby Boy and Baby Girl, and a number of other works. So they're about this digesting of an American vernacular imagery that is also pop, I would argue, like toys, but it's coming at pop from a sideways direction. And we have a small selection of those images on view in the exhibition, but the archive that we received from Marisol has this accumulation of images of weddings. And they run the gamut, all ages, races in America, parts of the country, clearly. And with those, she ended up making a work called The Wedding, which we could not find for the exhibition, unfortunately, where she marries herself. But she's deploying all of the tropes that she found in these images. And when you put them all together, I mean, just like anyone who's been to the Eastman Museum in Rochester can say, when you put vernacular photography in the sifter and you look at it often enough, we're all mimicking each other in this way that's sort of unending.
Yeah.
With selfies too, it hasn't changed. Other questions? Well, okay, I see one more, thank you. The question was, why do we think she left us this enormously profound gift? I think there's 2 reasons, and there's probably 10 more that I don't know. One is that we were the first museum to buy her work. And we put it on view right away. We invited her to the museum. That sort of faith was not extremely common in the 50s and 60s. There were other museums, though, who bought work out of that same show. MoMA bought a work out of that exhibition. I have tracked the receipts. We paid first. So I think it's a lesson. It's a lesson to pay your bills on time. But also, her dealer, Sidney Janis, who she worked with from the late 60s straight up until his death, and worked also with the gallery even after he passed, was a Buffalonian. And I think that relationship was an incredibly important one in her life. So I've always thought that played a role. There are some friends of Marisol's in the audience. You might be able to ask them after the talk if they have other theories. But those are the 2 I think of the most. Okay, Paige.
Was there any discussion with her about retrospective, or were there? Was there and connected to the gift?
The question was, were there discussions with her about a retrospective connected to the gift? No, there weren't, no. But this is not her first retrospective. This is the first posthumous one, and it's the first that had the great privilege of being able to look at the entirety of her work, including her papers and her archives, much of which was very carefully stewarded by her good friend, Mimi Trujillo, who's here in the audience, who helped take care of Marisol and also helped with this kind of preparing this bequest. But no, this is in a way, this exhibition was devised to begin grappling with the breadth and richness of this bequest. If you have an exhibition, you can't wait too long to begin the work. And so it gave us a chance to begin it, and there's still so much more to come. Thank you all so much.